Hello, Weight Loss Winformation neighbors. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever felt like you were being picked on? Have you ever felt like you were being ganged up on? Well, I'm pretty sure for most of us, we could say we experienced that during our childhood at some point in time. But what about as an adult? I have titled this episode, Why is Everybody Always Picking on Me? And you may likely not be old enough to remember, but way back in the day, like my parents' day, so we're talking many, many, many decades ago, there was a song by the Coasters, and the title of it was Charlie Brown. And there's a line in there that says, "Why is everybody always picking on me?" So when I was thinking about this episode, that's the line that came to my mind. And that's why I'm calling this episode, Why is Everybody Always Picking on Me? I'm going to start by giving you a scenario, and I want you to imagine this scenario as best you can. I'm going to give you 3 scenarios, all of them involving our friend Sarah. So Sarah, let's say she's in her mid-30s, and Sarah recently lost about 87, 90 pounds, and she did so in about 22 months. She's been really, really careful about keeping the amount of ultra-processed food she eats to a minimum, and she is really proud of her efforts, as she should be, as should most of you who are really doing a great job with what you're putting in your mouth. So she and her best friend of forever get together every week, almost without fail, every Tuesday night, and together they watch their very favorite TV show. Now, this best friend, she's seen Sarah's progress over this whole weight loss journey and probably suffered with her through, a number of prior weight loss attempts. And so she knows how important this is to Sarah. And she's always celebrated her successes and is really encouraging her in this weight loss process she's currently in. She is most definitely, without any doubt, in Sarah's corner. So one week, while they get together to watch their show, at the end of the program, her friend looks at Sarah and so very kindly she says to her, "I'm so proud of how you've improved your health and how you've changed your eating habits and gotten active. I've noticed that in the last couple of weeks, when we watch our show, I've been seeing you eat things I haven't seen you eat for a really long time. And, like the chips and the candy. And I just want to check in with you and make sure things are all right." Well, without hearing all of that last sentence, Sarah immediately snaps back at her friend and says, "I have not been eating a bunch of junk food." Okay, let that sink in. Maybe you've been Sarah, maybe you've been her friend in a situation. Now let's put Sarah in another scenario. She and her significant other have been going to couples therapy for several weeks, and it's been going really well. Sarah tells the therapist that she's concerned about her partner because her partner's been really, really quiet lately. The past week really hasn't shared a lot of thoughts or feelings with Sarah, and that's something that they've been working on doing since they've been in therapy. So the therapist asks her partner about this, and the partner says to Sarah, looking at her, because as therapists, we make the two people talk right to one another instead of talking through us. So the partner says to Sarah, "I've been kind of standoffish when it comes to sharing my thoughts and feelings with you lately, because it seems like when I talk to you about anything I have concerns about regarding your behavior, you get mad and you change the topic and you blame me for something that maybe you don't like that I'm saying, and then you give me the silent treatment." Well, at this, Sarah nearly jumps from her seat and she raises her voice and she verbally points the finger at her partner, saying, "All you ever do is tell me what I do wrong. You're the one that needs to look at their own behavior." Again, have you been Sarah in this situation? And have you maybe been the partner in this situation? Last scenario. Again, we've got Sarah. And in addition to being in couples therapy, Sarah is in group therapy with all women. So she's complaining to these women. She's telling them about the situation that happened with her friend while they were watching TV and what her friend said and how it shamed her. And then she tells them about her partner, I'm putting air quotes on this, constantly criticizing her. So the women listen to her and they hear her stories. And when people give feedback or share a thing in group therapy, the other members are invited to give feedback because that's how we learn, that's how we grow. Well, one woman in the group, Meryl, says very, very softly and kindly to Sarah, I can tell you're really mad about these things, and yet it sounds like you've been defensive in both situations. Then another member of the group, Amber, says, I have to agree, Sarah. It does sound like you've kind of lashed out at both of them. And then a third woman, Carrie, agrees. Sarah says, you know what, I'm feeling really beaten up by all of you right now. And by my partner and my friend. Why is everybody picking on me? Okay. Have you been Sarah? Have you been a group member? Have you been a good friend giving feedback? Now, as a therapist, this is something I hear a lot, especially when I've done couples counseling and group therapy. I've done a lot of group therapy. I've done some couples counseling, and it's inevitable that when a person is being given feedback that stings, it hurts, it's like, I don't want to hear that. A lot of times what comes out of their mouth is, I'm feeling really beaten up on. I'm feeling picked on. So let me ask you, as you were listening to these scenarios, did you think the same thing about Sarah? Did you think that about her reactions? Did you think she was being defensive with her partner and with her friend? Did you think she was being defensive and reactive in response to the feedback that the group members gave her? It did seem like that to me. But before I continue, I want to pose this question to you. If one person in a relationship where things are kind of rocky at the moment, if they kindly, gently ask their person, their partner, to go to couples counseling with them, and the other person adamantly refuses, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to see some stranger and have them tell me what to do or tell them my personal business. Or maybe they say something like, therapists just want to keep you in session forever because they just want your money. And maybe they say something like, I don't need a blankety blank therapist. You're the one with the problems. Do those sound like defensive responses to you? Because they do to me. And so did Sarah's responses. Now, at first glance, it'd be pretty easy to judge either Sarah or, in this last scenario, the person who refuses to go to therapy. And why do you think that is? Why do you think people respond defensively? Whether it's if they're asked to go to therapy or if, like Sarah, a good friend gives them feedback that's maybe uncomfortable, or your partner gives you feedback, or other people around you, maybe in a meeting at work, give you feedback that kind of stings. Well, here are some of the reasons that people get defensive. But before I spell those out, I want to share with you what we're exactly going to cover in this episode. First, we're going to talk about how can you spot if somebody's being defensive. Whether you're defensive yourself, how are you going to know? Am I being defensive? And how can you spot it in other people? Then we're going to talk about what are the reasons people react defensively. And thirdly, what are the dangers for you and your relationships of not working toward changing defensive behavior. Finally, we'll talk about how do you go about being less defensive, or what can you do to react less defensively in those situations. So let's start with how you can spot defensiveness, whether again it's yourself. How do I know when I'm being defensive? How do I know when my partner is being defensive? And sometimes when a person might be confronted about defensiveness, like that's been an issue in our marriage for a lot of years. And typically, although I'm sure I am equally guilty of being defensive, it's a very at the ready response with my husband. So when I would share with him, you seem to be very defensive about this. And I didn't always say it that nicely, I'll promise you. There were times when I was really nasty. I would say, oh, there you go, being defensive again. It's your first response. So I wasn't helping matters any. And yet, when a person feels defensive, and my husband is also a very intellectual kind of guy. He's an accountant, so he thinks logically. So he would say, well, I'm just trying to explain myself. Now, sometimes it's true. People are trying to explain themselves, and it may come across as being defensive. So how do we know? What is the difference between trying to explain where you're coming from and defending as a protective mechanism where you're coming from? So signs of defensiveness include making excuses for yourself or for your behavior. So when we were listening to the situations with Sarah, the situation with her friend, she may have a defensive excuse for her behavior that sounds something like, listen, I only eat junk food once a week when we're together. I'm not perfect and I don't need to be. So she starts off by trying to explain to her friend, I only do this once a week when we're together. And then she gets a little bit snarky there. I don't need to be perfect. So if you're making excuses for yourself or for your behavior, it's a potential sign that this is actually defensive or protective or get the heck out of my face behavior. Another sign of defensiveness is when people feel personally attacked or criticized. If you're part of the Bariatric Aftercare online program, I talk all the time about the 4 agreements. And one of those 4 agreements is don't take things personally. When somebody shares with you their feedback is this is what I'm thinking, this is how I'm feeling, and there's a way to do that that's appropriate, and there's a way to do that that's inappropriate. So using myself as an example, when I would say to my husband, you're being defensive again, that's inappropriate, right? I'm pointing the finger at him, I'm blaming him, I'm shaming him, I'm accusing him. Feedback, on the other hand, would say, Steve, based on your behavior, the tone of your voice, and what you said, it appears as though you're feeling very defensive right now. Now that sounds very clinical, and you may think, oh, I'm not going to say that in day to day, but you do. You can learn to do that. And I'll tell you the difference it makes is tremendous. Because if I say, you're just being defensive, no, he's going to be even more reactive. But if I say, from what I'm seeing and hearing, you seem to be defensive. I'm not accusing him. I'm not saying you absolutely are. I'm saying this is my perspective. I'm hearing the tone. I'm listening to your words, and it appears as though you're defensive. It opens up a lot more room for the person to say, maybe I am. You know what? You're right. I'm being defensive. So that's a little communication aside. But when people are feeling, adults especially, we're talking adults in this whole entire episode. So if you're in a group therapy, if you're wherever, if you're with friends and they're all kind of saying, you know, Connie, your tone of voice really does get a little intense at times. Now, if I'm feeling like, oh God, you guys are attacking me, you're really criticizing me, as opposed to, these guys are all saying the same thing and they're all experiencing my tone of voice in the same way, there might be something to that. But if I'm feeling all attacked and criticized, then chances are I'm going to respond defensively. So with Sarah, who clearly felt attacked and criticized by her friend when the friend mentioned Sarah's increased consumption of junk food, Sarah just lashed out at her because she clearly felt personally attacked. Now, let's say I have a group of friends saying, Connie, your tone of voice is, a little bit intense sometimes. And almost all of them are saying the same thing. Well, I learned in therapy a long time ago that if 10 people, the expression goes, if 10 people tell you you have a tail, you might want to turn around and take a look. So if I'm hearing the same feedback in different areas of my life, for example, I heard that feedback, this is a true story, from my husband when we were first married. It's like, God, your tone, it's so, what? I heard it in my schooling all along. Connie, you're going to have to monitor your tone of voice. I've heard it from friends. So I know that it's true. I'm hearing this feedback from different places. And I don't need to be wounded by that. I need to say, these people are trying to tell me something that isn't working in my favor. It's not about if I get all wounded and, oh my God, everybody's picking on me. It's a sign that I'm feeling very, very defensive, not in a healthy way. But I will tell you in a minute, it's protection, so you don't have to feel shamed here. All right, another sign of defensiveness is when we shift the focus to somebody else's flaws or their mistakes. So maybe Sarah, if she was talking to her friend, if the conversation had continued, maybe she would come out with something like this. I'm not the only one eating junk food. You seem to be enjoying yours. So now I'm going to shift the blame or shift the focus from you talking about me to looking at you. I've been very guilty of this in my relationship with my husband because he'll point out something that I do that's upsetting. And what do? For years, I would say, you do the same thing. You do the same thing. So now it's not about me anymore. I'm going to point the finger at you and let's talk about you doing that. So I'm deflecting. I'm trying to get the focus off of me. That's a defensive strategy. Another thing, and you'll notice this a lot if you're listening to people or if you're engaged in a difficult conversation that isn't going well, people often listen to respond rather than to understand. So in my arguments with Steve for many, many years, we never allowed the other one to get their full sentence out before we were rushing in with another attack on them. And so we were both reacting and being defensive with each other, and it got us nowhere. And so if the conversation again between Sarah and her friend went on and on and on, Sarah probably had a lot of retorts in her mind. And maybe she'd even interrupt her friend before the friend was able to finish the sentence. So if we're not listening, giving a person a chance to say what they want to say before we're interrupting and somehow deflecting, we're being defensive because we're listening to respond and protect ourselves, which gives us a clue into what defensiveness is about. But another way to spot defensiveness in people is when people use a condescending tone or they kind of take on this, well, I'm better than you, at least I don't do that sort of attitude. That's a defensive behavior because, again, I'm denying my culpability in anything that I'm doing, and I'm pointing out that, well, you're not all that great. And so with Sarah, if she resorted to saying something to her friend like, well, I don't know who you think you are, acting like you're all perfect or something, that's a defensive response. So the reasons that people act defensively are, as I have said in these examples, protective in nature. When you think about witnessing other people who are being defensive, it's probably pretty easy to recognize it. However, when we're the one being defensive, it's very different. We don't think we're being defensive. We think we're being picked on. We think people are ganging up on us. We think they're shaming us. We think they're all the things that I just said. So we get defensive because it's almost like if you have a visual, it's like if a ball is coming at your face, you're going to put your hands up in front of your face and try to push that ball away before it smacks you in your face. You're protecting your face. So defensive behavior is sort of like that. You're trying to protect yourself. So as I go through the rest of the information of this episode, I really want you to listen with a great deal of self-compassion. And I've been talking a lot more recently about the critical nature of self-compassion. So if you listen to this episode and you're like, "Oh my God, that's me. I'm horrible. I'm awful. I'm worthless. She's really picking on me." That isn't going to help you. Because when we do that, we just spiral down into more negativity. And we have to remember that most of our less than healthy behaviors, whether it's our eating behaviors or it's our communication behaviors or it's our how we react or respond to people, a lot of these things are learned ways of protecting ourselves emotionally from things that we don't want to hear. That's what defensiveness is about. It's like, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to think about that as possibly being true about me. I don't want to hear from you or you or you or you the things that are probably true about me if so many people are seeing this in me. So I'm going to defend myself, and it's going to be in an unhealthy way. Kind of like emotional eating is an unhealthy way of dealing with stress. It's a protective way, emotional eating, because I don't want to feel the unpleasant emotions. So I'm eating to make myself feel better. Well, with emotional protection, we kind of do the same thing. I don't want to hear somebody say that I'm imperfect or I'm doing something wrong or I'm anything that I don't want to acknowledge to myself as being true. So it's a learned protective skill. And you'll see kids do it all the time. Listen to a bunch of kids in an argument. They're constantly defending themselves. And if you're a kid on a playground and you're being bullied, it might be a good tactic. It might be a way to protect yourself emotionally. But I will tell you what, as an adult, it's going to do nothing but destroy your relationships. Most of us crave, desire, want, and need to be in close relationship with other people. Our worlds are so much about relationship and connection. So if you're watching this, you can see me putting my hands, palms together. We want to be close, facing each other. But most of us use these unhealthy communication skills and defensiveness, and it's like we turn the front tops of our hands toward each other, and it repels one another. That's not an easy position. So we want to move closer to each other, but so often through our defensive behavior, through our protective mechanisms, we drive people away from us. So defensiveness in relationships is not going to be of service to us, but we do it to try to protect ourselves, which means we have injured egos. Not like ego like I'm all that great, but injured senses of self. You've heard me talk about feeling less than, feeling shame-filled, feeling not good enough, feeling like you don't belong. And for a lot of people who have struggled with the disease of obesity for a lot of their lives, they've been made to feel this way by other people, then they internalize that message. So a lot of us grow up, and it could be from other things as well, just like myself with addiction. We grew up thinking I'm not that good, I don't fit in, I don't belong. And then as adults, we're very protective of anything that threatens to hurt us emotionally. So we kind of grow up preparing ourselves to constantly be on guard against anything that's going to hurt us emotionally. The problem with that is it's not going to work for us. It doesn't work in adult relationships. And a lot of the things you read online and a lot of the memes and a lot of what we talk about on the Weight Loss Winformation Podcast and in the Berry Aftercare group online is that we have to let go of things that no longer serve us. And the thing is, as adults, we carry those things from childhood that have protected us, whether it was food, whether it was emotional protection through defensiveness, whatever it is, we carry that with us into our adult lives. And then it works against us because healthy relationships will not survive that sort of unhealthy emotional protection. So we've got to recognize it for what it is. It's an attempt at self-protection, but it doesn't work anymore. We've got to learn other skills as adults in order to be healthy adults. In the Gain While You Lose class that I do, I talk a lot about what is a healthy adult and how does a healthy adult behave. An emotionally healthy adult doesn't give in to these defensive behaviors. They're able to take a breath and go, it's a piece of information. I can accept it, or maybe it doesn't fit for me. But this is that person's perspective. Maybe right, maybe wrong. If it is right, if they are saying something that's true about me, I'm going to learn and grow from it and become a better version of me. So be very self-compassionate as you listen to this information, because it's going to sting a little bit if you're a type of person like me and like almost all of us whose instant reaction is to defend. So there's nothing wrong, and it will probably always be that way. The difference is how you're able to catch it and not react, but learn to respond in a healthier way. So the other thing that I want you to be aware of is kind of what I just said. This tendency to want to jump in and emotionally protect ourselves in a defensive manner when we're getting feedback from others that may sting, it's not going to go away. That is something that lives with us. It's a natural, it's like an automatic negative thought. This is an automatic response to being told something we don't want to hear. So that won't go away, but what can change is how I react to it. So in my own example, in my relationship with Steve, if he's coming at me with something, I had to learn how to take a breath and pause before I spat out, well, you do it too, and say, all right, let me process this. Give me an example of what you're talking about. Okay, I can see where you're coming from with that. Rather than, bam, I'm going to smack it back in your face because I don't want to feel it. Now let's talk about the situation with Sarah, all right? She's naturally going to feel defensive, as any of us would when people are saying these things to her. So the natural instinct is to, deflect that ball from hitting our face and shove it at the other person. So she might want to blurt out with, well, you're also eating a bunch of crap food, so don't get all over me about it, right? What that's going to do is cause a rift in that relationship. Her friend may then respond to her negatively, and they may, have this big fight, which often happens the closer the relationship, the more this happens until we both grow up a little and learn to handle things differently. So, in an attempt to be a healthier version of herself, Sarah might hear that, feel the desire to react and smack that ball back at her friend's face, but takes a breath and rather than reacts, responds with saying something like, it really hurts to hear that. So I'm acknowledging that hurt. But I have to say, you're right. I want to be mad at you. But I know you're saying this because you care about me and you're seeing me do things I haven't done for a long time by eating this junk food. So that is a healthy adult response. I'm not pretending it didn't hurt. I'm saying that really hurt. But I have to look at it and I have to know that you are coming to me from a place of love. And I've had a lot of situations like this in my friendships in both directions. And I'll share some of those examples with you. But the truth is, most of the time, we defend ourselves Not because we feel wrongfully accused, but because we have an inkling that the person is probably right, right? And that when they bring this to our attention, it sort of confirms how we judge ourselves. We pretty much know when we're doing something that's inappropriate at some level. And when they, shine a neon light on it, it's like, oh crap. And we don't like it and we don't want to hear it. So be kind to yourself as you listen to this, because chances are you're going to see yourself in a lot of the things I'm going to share. Does it make you bad or wrong or totally unhealthy human being? It means this is an area you might want to work on. And I promise you, this is an area I have been working on in my life for 35 years. And I would say it's only been in the last 10 or so that it's really gotten to a point where feedback from people who I know love and care about me is a gift, and I receive it as a gift. It might not always be accurate, and then I'll process with them. I might say, I don't see that. Can you share with me what you're seeing, And I'll tell you, the last person I ever wanted to get feedback from was my husband, because we had such a pattern for so long of pushing each other's buttons in response to our own defensiveness that I didn't trust his feedback. I was thinking he's trying to hurt me with his feedback, because I would hurt him with the feedback. The people we love the most, we know their buttons. If I say this, it'll really piss him off. If he says that to me, he knows it's going to throw me over the edge. And so for a long time in our marriage, we use those things as a defensive thing. It's like, let's make them so mad that the attention won't be on me anymore, and then they'll act out and look like an idiot. That's not a good thing. I'm just saying, it's not a good thing. But in the last 10, 15 years, I have learned that nobody cares more about me than he does. And when we've learned to get out of that, I'm going to get you before you get me, and then I'm going to get you again and you're going to get me. When we got out of that dance, we started to trust each other's feedback and listen to what we had to share with one another. And it's been a really great gift. I had a woman this morning, so insightful. And I love that, because so many times when I'm doing a podcast on a topic, I'm like, well, just today, here's what I heard from a patient. And she literally said, I would react to him, and then he would react to me, and I would react to him. And she literally said, and until one of us quit reacting, we could have gone on for a long time. And she said, it's usually me who quits reacting that way. The way I put that is, all couples have a dance, and that couple had been married for decades, just like Steve and I, and we knew the dance. We knew how to get this thing blown out of proportion so that we didn't have to talk to each other for days. We'd give each other silent treatment. So much unhealthy behavior. And we rarely, I can't think of the last time that we've done this, but it's taken years and years and years of practice. So a lot of times what would happen, and I'm going to give you an example with Steve and me in this case. A lot of times our defensive behavior is it triggers something that we've experienced before. And I've said this on podcasts before. So my husband, one of 6 kids, he was kind of his mother's scapegoat. She took all of her frustration out on him, and all 6 kids would say the same story. Like, Steve was the one she picked on, and she picked on and criticized every little thing he did. So that's a sore spot for him. So if I said something that wasn't even critical or mean or attempt to push that button, if he heard anything that went through his mom filter and he perceived it as though I were saying something like she did, it was over, because he was going to react. He was going to be defensive. So a lot of times when we are, that overreaction thing, it's like you overreact because something was triggered in you that was painful in the past. So you're not only reacting to what's happening in the present, but it's multiplied because you're reacting to what's happened in the past. So we really had to do a lot of work, both of us, because the same was true for me. If he would say something in a way that my dad would very often sound rigid, and he wasn't going to change his mind on anything. So if Steve was not open to discussing something, then I felt like I was triggered because it's like, oh, you're being rigid like my dad. And then I would accuse him of being rigid. And then he would accuse me of something. And there we would go, right? So we both had to learn over time. All right, this is affecting me this way because when you say that, I hear my mother. And that's not a fair thing to do to you, Connie. Or I would say, when you say things like that, I'm triggered because I hear my father's rigidity. It's not fair for me to put that on you. Can we talk about what's going on here? And that's how you learn to do it. But you have to catch yourself first, which we'll get to when we talk about how do you overcome this tendency to be so reactive, so defensive. But just understand a lot of times when we're defensive or we're reactive or we're feeling picked on, it's because something within our history, those file drawers that I've talked about before, things that have happened to us in the past are opened up and we feel those emotions. So again, we resort to coping strategies we used as children, but they are not going to help us as adults. They no longer serve us well. We have to learn to look at our behavior and without feeling criticized or picked on, say, is that true for me? Is what they're saying true? We'll get to that when we talk about how to overcome this. But let me tell you, I want to talk a little bit about defensiveness and perfectionism. So if you are a perfectionist, again, listen with great compassion. This is not a statement about, oh my God, you're so unhealthy, or you really have a lot of work to do. But people who are perfectionists oftentimes have a deeper level of woundedness in this regard. So they are more likely to tap into defensiveness because it triggers their insecurity. It triggers their fear of you're going to leave me, you're going to reject me, you're going to give me the silent treatment. And there's a terror, a deep terror related to that. I speak from experience in this because if Steve and I ever got into a fight and he took a time out to cool off, but he left, to go for a walk or take a car ride or whatever, my internal self would absolutely hysterically panic. Like, oh my God, he's abandoned me, he's left me, he hates me. All the irrational, childish feelings would come to the forefront. I have had a lot of perfectionistic tendencies, and I want you to know that perfectionists oftentimes are so hard on themselves, and they often have this thing like we have to think we're better than people. We have this moral superiority kind of thing, which is also false. It's a protection in and of itself. I need to think I'm okay because I don't really feel like I am. So if you're a perfectionist and you're listening to this, understand that it's a typical characteristic of a perfectionist to believe that any minor mistake on my part is likely to lead to a significant loss. So I could do something seemingly small and insignificant, but in my mind, if you react to it, or if you chastise me, or if you criticize me, I panic because I'm afraid you're going to absolutely abandon me. And then all of my own insecurity is going to come out, and I'm going to beat myself up with, look what I've done. How could I have made them do this? So you've got to be really gentle and kind with yourself in this, but also learn to say, is that true about me? Because we're extra responsive to criticism. We absolutely dread people being disappointed in us, people not loving us, and the fear that they may leave us. So it's part of the reason that perfectionists work so dang hard not to make mistakes, because in a lot of ways, this I'm being perfect is a way to cover for the fact that I feel so imperfect. And I fear so much that people are going to abandon me if I make mistakes. So I found some great articles, as I always do when I'm preparing, and there was one by Leon Garber. And Leon is a licensed mental health counselor, and he wrote an article about chronic defensiveness. And there's a lot about perfectionism in here. And I will put that in the show notes, of course. But here's what he says about perfectionists. While most people can become defensive from time to time, perfectionists who tend to catastrophize, right? Everything's a catastrophe. It's not like, oh, they're mad at me. It's like, oh my God, they're going to leave me, and catastrophizing. Or the perfectionists will tend to believe that somehow they've caused this worst possible outcome. So perfectionists are more likely to engage in defensive protective strategies. He says they're chronically defensive. So if you're a perfectionist and this is hitting hard, it's because you've worked so hard to protect your sense of woundedness or not being okay enough. And he says if you are a partner with a perfectionist, or if a good friend of yours is a perfectionist and you're like, geez, they're so defensive, they're so dang defensive, they take everything so personally, it can help you to understand those people by realizing that they have a higher need than most people to protect themselves, because they spend so much of their own time trying to stay safe and not thinking about how insignificant or unimportant or not good enough that they are. And Leon also goes on to say that an unfortunate aspect of this chronically being defensive, typical of perfectionists, is that black or white thinking. So a lot of us engage in black or white thinking. I'm going to exercise every day of the week, or I'm never going to. I'm going to eat all the right foods, or I'm going to give in to all the bad foods, which there isn't such a thing, but just for terminology's sake. So perfectionists live in so much fear of these black or whites, fear of either feeling or perceiving themselves as inferior, so they can be extremely defensive, but they also have this tendency to think, I'm better than that. Look at how I live my life compared to how they live their lives. But it's a false sense of making ourselves feel okay. We need to feel a little bit superior in some ways, but it's just a way to protect ourselves from feeling punished or unaccepted or unacceptable. So if you deal with people who are defensive on the regular, instead of getting really angry with them, try to have a talk. Say, it seems like you're defensive quite a bit, as evidenced by, you seem to snap at me if I give you feedback. You seem to get really angry. Can we talk about whether or not you trust that I'm trying to give you feedback that is good for you, or, what's going on with you? Maybe take it to a therapist. If people are unwilling or not ready to look at this aspect of themselves, it might be something that a therapist can help with. So you don't have to beat yourself up for being defensive, but you have to start to learn to recognize that this is not going to help me, and that it is a symptom of trying to protect myself. What am I trying to protect myself from? The answer is often my own insecurity, my feeling of not being good enough. All right, so before we talk about how do I change that, and I just gave you a big one, it's asking that question. But why is remaining in a defensive posture in your closer relationships not healthy? What are the dangers of that? And again, in Gain While You Lose, we talk a lot about we want close relationships, and so many of us sabotage our relationships. Part of it is because we're afraid you're going to get so close to me and then you'll know how flawed I am, and we don't want to see that. Or part of it may be that I don't have the skills. I don't know how. I am ill-equipped to be in a healthy adult relationship. So I'm just going to do what I know. But unfortunately, a lot of that pushes people away from one another. So just like a lot of us don't have skills, we're ill-equipped in knowing how to deal with stress in a healthier way than emotional eating. We have to learn those skills. The same is true when it comes to defensiveness, because when we behave defensively and we push the other people away from us because of our own behavior, there's a part of us that knows I behaved badly and I'm responsible for some of the rift, unless we're so steeped in our own defensiveness that we're going to not accept any of that, which is very unhealthy. It's defensive on top of defensive. It's like a brick wall. We're going to push people away, and that's the danger of defensiveness. We're going to push people away. We want to learn to breathe, just like emotional eating. It's like take a beat, take a pause before you run to the break room or the vending machine or the drive-through. What is going on with me? What is it I really need? What's a healthier way to deal with this? Same thing works with defensiveness. It's like, what's going on with me? Because it keeps us from being close to the people that we really want to be closer to. And I'm going to tell you a story in a little bit about something that really made a change in my relationship with Steve, and it wasn't that long ago. Not that we've not been making big changes all the way along, because we have. But some of this stuff is buried deep, and you have to get ready, through peeling off those layers of pain and doing away with behaviors that don't serve you well. And you have to both be willing. So how do you go about becoming less defensive? Well, in the Weight Loss Winformation and Bariatric Care program online, I have a thing called the 4 ACEs, and there are 4 A words, and the first one is awareness. And awareness is always the first step of change. So if we're going to stop our defensive behavior, we have to be aware that we're doing it, and we have to be willing to accept that, oh yeah, that's what this is. So we might say, well, I didn't like that, but we're not willing to say I'm being defensive. We have to be willing to look at it and own it for what it is. And this takes time. It takes time because we're still pretty protective. The more woundedness we carry within us, the more protective we're going to be. And we can't just rip it all off at once. That's why they say therapy is like unpeeling an onion. You have to take it off a layer at a time and then get used to the new normal. And then you take another layer off and you become healthier. And when I say you take a layer off, I mean you get rid of some unhealthy thinking process or unhealthy behavior. And the more we do that, the healthier we become, the healthier our eating habits are going to be. The more we're going to like ourselves, and the more likely we are going to treat ourselves with food, exercise, companionship, all the things better. People who like themselves treat themselves like they like themselves, as opposed to engaging in self-sabotaging and punishing behaviors. So it takes time, practice, self-compassion, to allow ourselves to say, in the words of Taylor Swift, hey, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me. I'm getting in the way of a healthy relationship. My defensive behavior is like a barricade between me and the people that I love. I'm pushing them away through my defensive behavior. So you got to first of all become aware that you're doing it, and then willing to work through it. In other words, you got to say, yep, that was defensive. What am I trying to protect here? Because it's not easy to put those defenses down. And food, actually, is a protective mechanism too for a lot of us. Protects us from our own unpleasant emotions. Not that much different. Defensiveness is like food in that regard. We use it to protect ourselves from unpleasant emotions. So there's this article that I also will include in the show notes. It's called Defeating Defensiveness, and it's by Rachel Miller. And she tells us that when we acknowledge our defensive behavior, it puts us in a real vulnerable position, right? Because we're vulnerable to being seen as being wrong. We're vulnerable to actually being more fully seen. Like, oh God, I just did that and I'm really embarrassed, and it's because I'm not feeling that good about myself. And who wants to see that about us, right? We're afraid we'll be seen as being wrong, and maybe we are. Or, we're afraid that we'll be, that perfectionist thing. It's like, oh God, they're going to know I'm not perfect. So it requires a lot of willingness to be vulnerable and say, you know what? I sure was defensive. I lashed out at you and I turned the topic onto you, and that was wrong of me. Wow, that goes a long way in healing relationships and bringing us back together. So we have to be willing to acknowledge that I was being defensive, take ownership of it, clear up any damage that we might have done. And here's the truth. When we're willing to say, you're right, I was being really defensive, I did not have the right to try to make this about you. I did not have the right to explode on you the way I did. I did not have the right to, criticize you in return. Those conversations bring us closer to one another. People love and treasure the vulnerability in us, and then they're more likely to be vulnerable in turn. So it's definitely a win-win. And as this author says, she says, vulnerability and defensiveness cannot coexist. So if I'm going to be defensive and hold up that hand in front of my face so that ball doesn't hit me, I can't be at all vulnerable. If I'm willing to take my hands down a little bit and maybe get smacked in the face where it might do me some good and say, hey, you're behaving badly here. It's not easy, but it might be a good thing. Most of us work really, really, really hard to avoid criticism. We work hard at not being wrong. We don't want to look like we're wrong. We don't want to look like we're making mistakes, but we're human. How are we not sometimes going to be wrong? How are we not sometimes going to make mistakes? And unless somebody's willing to love us enough to point that out to us, we may not see it. And defensiveness is corrosive to healthy communication. It keeps us from that connection. So the bottom line is, when we are willing to learn to accept feedback about ourselves, even if it stings, it's a gift. It's a gift we give ourselves. And in turn, by accepting that from other people, it's a gift to them and to our relationship. So I'm going to give you some examples in my life of giving and receiving feedback. Very recently, I gave some feedback to my daughter about, of all things, believe it or not, the tone of her voice. I know where she got it. I have no illusions that she did not learn that from me. But when I hear her talking to that kids with that tone of voice, my heart just aches. And so I said to her, and I say this to my children whenever I give them feedback, I'm saying this because I love you enough not to ignore it. When I hear you talk to your children in that tone of voice, it hurts my heart. So I'm not saying you're a terrible mother. How could you possibly talk to your children that way? And then especially in this case, I'll say to my daughter, I know where you got it from. I have no illusions that you did not learn this from me. You are now in your 30s, and it's up to you to either change it for yourself or not. But I'm sharing with you that I see in you what has been shown to be true for me as well. And I hope that you will make the changes so that it doesn't harm your children. So I totally believe in loving somebody enough to share with them what I'm seeing. Doesn't mean I'm right, but it means this is what I'm perceiving. This is what I'm hearing. This is what I'm seeing. Do with it what you want. Because I don't get to control what she does. She's a grown woman. She can take my feedback and say, you're full of crap. Or she might process and go, well, there's some merit to that. Maybe I'll make some changes. What she does with it is not mine to control. What is mine to share with the people I love is what I see that's damaging them or others. As I've shared many, many times, one of my very best friends many years ago said to me, in response to how I talked to my husband at that time, she said, Connie, what gives you the right to talk to him that way? And it was such a valid question. It was like, and I'll tell you, it stung, right? But I knew she was right. It was like, I don't talk to people at work that way. I don't talk to my friends that way. What gives me the right to talk to the man I love that way? And it was great feedback. I didn't go around, why are you picking on me? I was like, oh crap, she's right. So today, I'm going to give you one last example, and then I'll talk about some ways to reduce this defensive behavior. More recently, it was another situation involving my children. And I had some concerns, and so I wanted to get feedback from my 3 best friends about this issue. And so I sent them all the very same text, and I got responses from all of them. And two of them gave me responses that were like, oh, little daggers to my heart. But it was what I asked for. And I thanked them. I was like, wow. I was like, I'm not sure I was expecting that, but I so appreciate your insight into my way of thinking. And I really need to rethink some of what is going on with me, because one of them pointed out that this may be in relation to, my own childhood. And one of them was like, well, I remember when your kids were really young, you did it. And I'll tell you, those things stung, but I was grateful. I mean, they stung, but after a minute, I was like, okay, I asked for this because I wanted to know if I'm out of line here and if this is my own issue. And so I got really great feedback. And that is where we want to get, where we ask for feedback and then we process it and go, does this fit? Well, yeah, in my case, every single thing they said to me fit because they know me really well. So, and even with my husband, now he's one of the first people I go to and say, listen, I want you to tell me what you think about the way I'm processing this, the way I'm thinking about this, the way I'm handling this. Because I know that he's going to come to me out of love and say, I think you're being a little too harsh, or I think you're being, no, that's great. They might have something to say about it, but you're being appropriate with your expression of your thoughts. So here's how we reduce defensive behaviors. All right. So we've got to decrease, and this comes from the author Rachel Miller in the article that I'll post. She says we've got to decrease reactivity. In other words, barking back, not listening before we respond, acting on that first stinging impulse, feeling sorry for ourselves. Stop reacting and slow down and give it some thought. We have to decrease deflection, meaning you do it too. I don't know where you think you're coming from because you do the same thing. We've got to quit deflecting and let it sink in and process the feedback they gave us. We have to stop assuming things. She's just saying that because she's jealous. That's an assumption. She's just saying that because she doesn't want me to be happy. That's an assumption. She's just saying that because she wants my boyfriend for herself. That's an assumption. Knock it off. That's one of the least healthy behaviors we can engage in. We can say, it could be that this is the reason, but I don't know. I'm not that person. So I can't say for certain why somebody's doing something. But what I can pretty much say for certain is most of us are responding out of protection. So whatever she's doing, I'm guessing it's protective for her. But I don't have a right to assume what that is. And we make that mistake over and over. The last thing we have to decrease is judgment. Judgment of the person. They don't like me. They're just picking on me. They're just whatever it is. And, not judge ourselves. If we know, like, oh my God, I did do that, we don't have to judge ourselves. We go, what can I learn from this? How can I rectify this? How can I become closer to that person through this? So those are the things she suggests we decrease: reactivity, deflection, assumptions, and judgment. Here are some things she says to increase. And again, I want to liken this to so many other things in your recovery process, like emotional eating. So we need to increase self-soothing. Emotional eating is often a way to soothe ourselves. Being defensive is a way to soothe ourselves. We don't want to think about ourselves as acting defensively or whatever is being pointed out to us. So we need to learn skills and tools for soothing ourselves that have nothing to do with blasting other people or harming ourselves with food or alcohol or anything else. So things like learning the breathing skills, journaling, calling a trusted friend, setting boundaries, giving yourself time and space to reflect before having a conversation. Self-soothing. We have to increase that. We have to increase curiosity, and I think this is one of the best things we can do to decrease being defensive, by asking yourself the question, well, what am I defending against? What am I trying to protect? Oh, I'm trying to protect them seeing that I'm not perfect. Oh, I'm trying to protect myself from feeling guilty about what I did. Oh, I'm trying to protect myself from looking unhealthy in their eyes. Another way of being curious is to ask them questions. Wait a minute, can you explain that in a different way? Because the way I heard it was from a defensive perspective. Can you share with me more about what you're thinking? So be curious, find out more. What are you saying? Give me a better example. Give me some other ways that I do this, not in a critical way, but in a help me understand myself better kind of way. So increase self-soothing, increase curiosity, increase listening. So listen to understand. So if I'm saying to my husband, when you, leave your clothes on the ground, which he does not do, but when you leave your clothes on the ground, I feel frustrated because now it adds to my load. So listening. Why is this person saying to me, how is my behavior negatively affecting their life? Rather than, oh, why are you talking about that? Just pick up your dang clothes. Getting snippy and defensive. So listen to understand. What is the reason they're sharing this with me? How does this affect them? Listen to understand rather than to respond, especially in a judge or a critical way. And listen so that you can not judge them or yourself. Just get more information and then reflect. Listen and then think about what they're saying. And taking a responsibility or accountability is such a healthy thing to do. You're right. I did just throw that back at you. I don't have the right to do that. I apologize. I'm not liking that about myself. And then self-reflection. We need to increase self-reflection. Take some time, think about it, process it with your other friends. These people at work today were telling me that, my tone of voice is a little harsh. What do you think? Well, Connie, at times it can be. I know you don't mean it that way, but it sure can sound that way. So bounce that off people you trust and love. Like I reached out to my 3 friends and asked, what do you think about this? So those are important skills. You want to gain awareness, and that goes along with asking questions and reflecting. Because when I'm defensive, I am working real hard to protect. And then I'm not listening. I'm not asking questions. I'm not questioning myself and what did I actually do, and is there validity to this? So we have to gain awareness. We've got to understand or look at, why am I defending myself? What is the root cause of this? Is it fear? Is my pride in the way? Do I need to prove something to these people about myself? Am I reacting because That tone of voice triggers everything that caused me fear from my father, or what is it? What is happening that I am reacting in such a strong defensive way? And again, listen openly and ask questions. So when we're in the throes of things, like if you're in a heated argument with your spouse and it's just not going well, and you're caught up in your defensiveness and they're caught up in theirs, try to take a time out, practice the self-soothing, do the reflection, and then come back to it and try to process what went wrong, not the situation, not the content. Like, we're not going to talk about whose turn it was to take out the garbage. We're going to talk about what happened that I reacted so strongly. I was feeling pressured. I was feeling criticized. I was feeling, and I responded inappropriately. I need to take responsibility for that. So remind yourself that this is all about progress. It's not about perfection. We will never get this right. Like I said, just recently, the feedback I asked for stung, but I didn't react to that sting. I was like, wasn't expecting that exactly, but I know they wouldn't say it if they didn't see it. And I know these people love me and wouldn't try to hurt me with this. So I need to really think about how this fits in this situation. It's a gift. It's a gift to give yourself, your relationships. You want to break the patterns. You want to get rid of behaviors that no longer serves you. And I guarantee you, defensiveness very rarely is going to serve you well. So when you're aware that your behavior is defensive in an unhealthy way, ask yourself, what is it I'm defending so strongly? What am I needing? Just like with emotional eating. All right, I have this emotion. I'm eating to calm it. What is it I really need? Do I need comfort? Do I need compassion? Do I need companionship? Do I need, what is it I really need? And then how can I go about getting that? And I told you something that happened in the fairly recent past with my husband and I. And this was one of the last stuck points that we had. And we would get into our pattern and then we would lock down, both of us. He's locked in his position, I'm locked in mine. And we would be at a stalemate. And this particular thing had been going on every year or two for our whole marriage. So this was happening during COVID and we were in lockdown. We were physically in lockdown. We were in emotional lockdown. So I set up an appointment with a therapist just for myself. Telehealth. I didn't know this person. And I called and I said, listen, explained the situation. And I said, I can tell you what I think he's doing. And I'm sure he could tell you what he thinks I'm doing. But I need to know what I'm doing. I need to know where I'm locked. And so she gave me some ideas to ask myself, to be curious with myself. What is it I was needing him to hear? What was it I was needing my family when I was a child to hear? And she gave me about 4 or 5 questions to ponder. And as I did so over the next several days, I learned so much about myself. And I went to my husband, and instead of saying, okay, if you don't stop doing this, and if you continue to do this, and you know you're doing that, I went and I said, listen, I went to a therapist, and this is what she suggested I do, and this is what I did, and here's what I learned about myself. And he was so impressed with my vulnerability and my willingness to say, this is what I'm doing, rather than point the finger at him and say, here's what you're doing, pal, and you better knock that crap off. That he softened, and he was willing to be vulnerable about what was going on with him. So like my patient today said, somebody's got to stop the dance. So choose to be the person that changes the pattern, stops the dance, asks the questions, gets the insight, is willing to be vulnerable. So here are my take-home messages about why is everybody always picking on me and our defensiveness. Remember, feedback from people you trust, who love you, who do not want to hurt you, is a gift. Accept that gift. gift from people. You might even want to thank them because they're trying to help you. That doesn't mean you accept feedback from strangers on the street or people who have a vendetta against you, or maybe they don't, but you think they do, because you're not going to take that feedback well. And remember, it's not that you're not going to feel defensive, it's how you actually behave. Feeling defensive is not a problem. Lashing out from your defensiveness is a problem. So we learn, we grow, we progress. We are works in progress. So I would really ask you to share this podcast episode with people. Doesn't matter if they're working on a weight loss issue, because this is an issue for people, all people. And if you haven't signed up for the Berry Aftercare online, I really encourage you to do so. It is an amazing neighborhood of people who are supportive and helpful and kind and caring. I do not allow any negativity on there. And here's what I would encourage you to do with the information from this podcast. Ask a person close to you that you trust for feedback about one issue, just one, a safe one, like, do you think I snore? Or, something that's not going to totally do you in. And notice if you get defensive, and then handle it differently than you might. Work on handling it in a curious, open-minded kind of way, and process your feelings like, oh, I wanted to lash out at you. I felt very defensive. And remember, we're talking about your health, your whole health, your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health, your spiritual health. So your health, all of it, is your responsibility this day and every day. Thanks for joining me, and be sure to come back next week. These podcasts, I'm getting some amazing guests. They're coming up. See you next time.